is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Jill Newbronner, and here are tonight's top stories from East Asia. Top diplomats from the US and China in talks on the sidelines of an ASEAN gathering in Kuala Lumpur. Marco Rubio describing his meeting with Wang Yi as constructive, but with issues outstanding. He says a meeting of leaders is highly probable. South Korea, Japan and the US launch a joint air drill flying a B-52 strategic bomber and fighter jets to the Korean peninsula, while the allies' defence chiefs meet in Seoul to step up cooperation. The Australian Prime Minister heads to China to talk business and security with Canberra's biggest trading partner. Anthony Albanese is due to meet Chinese leader Xi Jinping before he's had a chance to meet Donald Trump. Now, after almost 24 years, Japanese beef might soon hit the shelves in China as the two countries finalize plans to restart shipments. Ahead on East Asia Tonight, with the clock ticking in the tariff truce between the US and China, our correspondent visits one of China's biggest wholesale markets to find how exporters are preparing for the onslaught. And
you got all of your power, not just electricity, but heat and transportation for your entire life. You would be responsible for basically a soda can of nuclear waste.
And that's a sneak peek at a CNA documentary that takes you across 10 countries to high-security nuclear facilities and the people who live in their vicinity. But first, the top diplomats of the US and China have met in person for the first time as trade tensions simmer between the world's largest economies. Marco Rubio and Wang Yi held talks on the sidelines of the ASEAN foreign ministers meeting in Kuala Lumpur, where US tariffs had dominated discussions. Mr. Rubio says talks were constructive, but some issues will still need to be worked through.
No matter what, the United States and China have to have relations. We have to have communication. We have to be able to interact with one another. And it's just impossible for the foreign ministers of our respective countries to not engage in conversation. So I'm glad we had that meeting today. There's a lot of work to be done. No one's saying it's easy, but we do have some opportunities on some things we might be able to work on to begin to build some momentum in our relationship. I thought it was a very good meeting. I really felt encouraged by it. But look, there's work to be done.
Beijing earlier this week warned Washington against reinstating higher tariffs on its goods after a temporary truce in May to pause the U.S. levies. Well, let's get more now from CNA's Melissa Goh. She's joining us live from Kuala Lumpur. Mel, Mr. Rubio, Mr. Wang on a diplomatic push to gain more support from the ASEAN members in Kuala Lumpur. How successful were they amid the unfolding trade war?
Well, how successful? Well, the verdict is still out, but both sides are saying it's productive. Now, some of these Southeast Asian countries that spoke said they would rather be mum, avoiding taking sides amid this superpower rivalry that's playing out here in the ASEAN platform in a very diplomatic way. Well, ASEAN's position is to remain neutral and independent, uphold multilateralism. That's been the driving force, that's been driving growth here. On one hand, China is ASEAN's largest trading partner for 4 consecutive years. Total trade last year almost hit $800 billion, while US is the largest consumer market, the largest buyer and investors for many of the countries. And that's why ASEAN member states, they welcome both Wang Yi and Secretary Rubio bilateral meeting that lasted over an hour. It's said to be the first time they met bilaterally. Well, I shouted a question at the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi while on his way out. He was all smile, but he said he would rather prefer a statement issuing later after this. Now, he's been adamant that China is a more reliable partner for ASEAN. He argued the Southeast Asia region is the priority for China's foreign policy, and pledging support and standing in solidarity with the ASEAN neighbours against the onslaught of unilateral tariffs almost all countries slept with high tariffs, ranging from 20 to 40%. On the final day of Secretary Rubio's visit, as we speak, he's still holding bilateral talks, bilateral meetings with all the South Asian countries and dialogue partners, one by one, making use of his trip to drive home the main message to the region that, South Asia, the Indo-Pacific is important for US. It's too important for US to ignore. President Trump just wants to continue to do business with ASEAN, invest in ASEAN, but he just needs to correct the imbalances all these years now. While the tariff may get in the way, he's confident that they will be resolved through negotiation. Now, he is upbeat, while member countries are already pursuing over the next few weeks before the August 1st deadline. That's when the higher tariffs kicked in.
All right, got it. Now, also, we should note that the bloc held a summit with its East Asian counterparts. What was significant there?
Well, the meeting was mainly focusing on how ASEAN and the East Asian counterparts, as well as the dialogue partners across the wider region can work together to weather the geo-economic and geopolitical storm. That's no passing weather phenomena. That's what Prime Minister Anwar said. It's a norm now, and it looks set to escalate with tariff trade measures increasingly being used as the sharpened tools, he said, to gain leverage, to define trading relations. But you know what? It's a rule book that many of the countries may be resorting to. Earlier today, we saw Prime Minister Anwar held talks with Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi in Putrajaya, and they talked about narrowing the trade deficit between both countries. Malaysia has huge trade deficit, we know, with China, and so are many countries across the world, across Southeast Asia. Now, nevertheless, Malaysia, as ASEAN chair this year, is seizing this platform to galvanize the region to stay together, to uphold multilateralism and embrace rules-based trading system, reject protectionism and also unilateralism. Now, it's really a tug of war we are seeing where nobody really wants to lose. Now, the Malaysia Foreign Minister, Mustafa Muhammad Hassan, in the final remarks, he actually hinted that, all the countries, especially at a point like this, should stick together. Let's listen to him.
With a combined nominal GDP of approximately USD 68 trillion, the countries in this hall today account for over half of the global economy. This economic weight reinforces the EAA's strategic importance not only as a platform for dialogue, but as a powerful engine for cooperation that broadens shared prosperity and enhances socio-economic resilience.
All right, thanks, Mel, for the coverage over the past couple of days. CNA's Melissa Go in Kuala Lumpur. A U.S. Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, has held trilateral talks with his Japanese and South Korean counterparts on the summit's sidelines. According to South Korea, discussions touched on ways the group would coordinate on key shared regional and global issues that involve their shared concern over North Korea's growing nuclear and cybersecurity threats, with the three nations agreeing to maintain strong deterrence against the DPRK. Seoul added that the group has also agreed to strengthen cooperation in energy, shipbuilding and supply chain security. This meeting comes just days after the U.S. Trump administration declared 25% tariffs on both allies. ASEAN foreign ministers have wrapped up their four-day meeting, reiterating their concern over global trade tensions. They issued a joint statement vowing to work constructively with all partners to build a predictable, free and fair rules-based trading system. The bloc also expressed concerns over activities in the South China Sea, which undermine peace and stability in the region. It hailed progress made on the Code of Conduct in the South China Sea, hoping for negotiations to conclude early. ASEAN foreign ministers also voicing a deep concern over the conflict in Gaza and denounced all acts of violence against civilians. Their joint statement urged all parties involved in the crisis to allow the delivery of humanitarian assistance. All parties, they say, must work towards a peaceful resolution to the conflict. Malaysia's foreign minister hits out at Israel's occupation of the Palestinian territories.
The longest conflict of modern history, rooted in the unjust and illegal occupation of the Palestinian territory, must be brought to an end. 80 years of impunity have emboldened Israel to the extent of openly committing genocide, including through mass starvation that includes babies and children. This is unacceptable. It must not be allowed to continue. It must be stopped.
And for more of our coverage on the ASEAN meetings, do head on to our website, cna.asia, or log on to our mobile app. Military chiefs from the US, Japan and South Korea have called for stronger security cooperation at a trilateral meeting in Seoul. The American commander noted that their cooperation has expanded to broader security threats. His Japanese and South Korean counterparts also highlighted the need to keep up the momentum of their three-way partnership. The trilateral chief of defense gathering comes amid concerns over China's rapid military buildup, the perceived growing threat posed by North Korea, as well as growing speculation that Washington might ask Seoul to pay more for them to station American troops in the country. Coinciding with that meeting are drills held at the southern island of Jeju, aimed at improving deterrence against possible nuclear and missile threats from North Korea. Now, the exercises involve the US B-52H strategic bomber, marking the first time this year that such an aircraft was deployed to the Korean peninsula for a drill. Let's stay on this topic with CNA's Im Young-suk joining us from Seoul. Young-suk, first of all, beyond boosting just cooperation, what else did the military chiefs want to discuss during the trilateral meeting?
Well, according to a statement released by the Defense Ministry after that meeting, the three military chiefs also condemned North Korea's unlawful nuclear and ballistic missile programs, and they agreed to continue coordination toward the complete denuclearization of North Korea. Now, the three sides also discussed the deployment of North Korea's troops to Russia, as well as the potential transfer of military technology from Russia to Pyongyang. Now, the three sides also called on North Korea to immediately halt all such unlawful activities, and they said that they would be deepening their cooperation in order to ensure peace and stability in the region. Now, let's hear what the U.S. Chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Kane, said at that meeting.
The DPRK and China are undergoing an unprecedented military buildup with a clear and unambiguous intent to move forward with their own agendas. We need to be mindful of that. We need to be able to demonstrate resolve, to be entrepreneurial and proactive in our partnerships, to make sure that our leaders at every echelon understand and trust each other, and to take the best available combat capability and capacity between our three nations so that we can fight tonight, fight together, and win together.
Now, the three sides also agreed to hold the next round of meeting next year in the United States. It's unclear if they did agree on when exactly they'll be holding this exercise Freedom Edge, as there were, reports earlier saying that it could be held sometime in September. But the Freedom Edge drills usually are held last year. It was held like 2 times, and it is expected to be held sometime this year. But so far, we haven't heard anything on that, though there are analysts saying that they do think that the U.S. could bring up the issue of troop reduction here in South Korea, too, during those talks, or try to get South Koreans to pay more for the 28,500 U.S. troops based here in South Korea. But the Defense Ministry did not say if these issues were discussed during the meetings here in South Korea.
Yeah, and the timing of the warning by those three countries to North Korea comes at an interesting point, because Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov is scheduled to head to Pyongyang later today.
Well, yes, he is. He is expected to travel to Pyongyang after his trip to Kuala Lumpur for that ASEAN foreign ministers meeting. Now, according to both the North Korea and Russian reports, Minister Lavrov is visiting Pyongyang from Friday to Sunday as part of the second round of strategic dialogue with his North Korean counterpart, Choi Sun-hee. Now, the two sides met earlier in Moscow last November, And so, this trip really comes amid rising concerns that the two countries are growing very close in recent years, with North Korea having sent troops, thousands of its troops, and ammunition to Russia in return for economic and military assistance. Now, we're not sure exactly what Russia promised North Korea in return for those troops, but there are worries that Russia is providing North Korea with sensitive technology that will help enhance North Korea's missile and nuclear weapons program. Now, some analysts here are saying that it is very possible that the foreign minister could also have a meeting with North Korea's leader, Kim Jong-un, and it is possible that he would be discussing arrangements for a possible visit by Kim Jong-un to Russia, too.
All right, many thanks, CNA's Im Young-suk, reporting live to us from Seoul. Now, coming up on East Asia tonight, South Korea's trade chief seeks a landing zone in tariff talks with the U.S. as Seoul presses Washington to pause the 25% levies. And a warm welcome back. We're also going to bring on Olivia Mazuki, who's here to tell us about, let me guess, tariffs.
That's right. Yeah, especially it's an issue that's bothering South Korea. And Trade Minister of the country, Yohan Koo, said the negotiations with the U.S. have entered a critical phase in order to seek a landing zone on tariff issues. So during his recent meetings in Washington, the country's top trade official has reportedly pressed for the suspension of the proposed 25% tariffs, which are set to take effect next month. South Korea is also seeking reductions in sector-specific levies on industries such as autos and steel. He added that the U.S. is interested in working with Korean firms to rebuild its manufacturing base in sectors such as shipbuilding and semiconductors. Trade talks with Washington are progressing after months-long leadership vacuum in Seoul following the impeachment of former President Yoon Suk-yeol. Meanwhile, a senior official from Trade Ministry says the U.S. has demanded South Korea join efforts to curb China in trade talks as the countries discuss cooperation in shipbuilding. Now, the U.S. is asking Seoul to boost U.S. investments and purchases of energy and agricultural products in return for relief in tariffs. Just about 1 month is left in the tariff truce between the U.S. and China, and the truce enters its final third leg with no deal in sight. So how are exporters in China bracing for the onslaught? CNA's Tan Yu-guan takes a trip down to one of China's biggest exporting hub in this report.
Located in the province of Zhejiang in eastern China, the EU International Trade Market is the largest small commodity wholesale market in the world. The businesses at EU occupy such an enormous share of the world's supply of everyday, low-cost consumer items that chances are at some point in your life you would have used an item that passed through the EU International Trade Market, even if you don't realize it. This makes EU an interesting case study of the impact of the trade war between the US and China. Zhao Huan runs a shop selling Christmas decorations from her family's factory. When the US announced a 90-day suspension of tariffs on China, she immediately got a message from an American client.
贸易战刚开始打第一轮的时候，客户并没有停止让我们生产，然后说增加到200关税的时候，就说这个订单先暂停，然后可能5月的样子，他说可以出了，这个货要着急出，要给他赶货，他要赶在这个90天之内，这个关税没有变化的情况下，把这批货出到美国。
But for Huan, this scramble was an exception rather than the norm. In recent years, her main markets have shifted.
我们近个2-3年来，就是南美的市场有巴西、墨西哥、阿根廷，然后智利增长比较快，就是说比较稳定。今年还有一个俄罗斯市场也相对很旺。
Huan's case reflects broader trends in the export market.
5. So this is 5 pieces of the.
Many traders have diversified to mitigate the risks of trading directly with US clients.
市场最大的国家应该就是墨西哥呀，然后土耳其，然后印度客人我们也有，对，还有中东啊、南美这边的客户比较多。 墨西哥的话应该是从去年开始吧。
While Feng Ling doesn't think her goods to Mexico are US bound, there have been reports of such backdoor routes used by US importers to avoid higher US tariffs on China.
他们自己会去转口贸易，我们做的生意是全球化的这个，反正客户在哪，或者客户需求在哪，我们就会去服务哪个市场。之前都是中国给美国代工或者做他们品牌为主嘛，所以接下去我们 EU 这边也好，或者中国的企业也好，都是做自己的品牌向全球输出了。
Market diversification helps a lot, but there's still fears that the US-China rivalry can spill over in other ways. Huan's Latin American clients, for example, are wary about CK Hutchison's sale of its ports around the globe to a US-European consortium.
我们南美的客户担心港口全部卖给他之后，然后海运费是他们美国人说了算，因为他们不太讲些规则，然后会很怕这个生意没法做。
Despite looming challenges, some traders here are quietly confident that EU will pull through, and it's their US clients that will suffer.
EU 的优势在于这个产品的更新速度和产品的成本控制，和这个我们后面的供应链。 他去美国生产是完全不可能的，他的生产成本就光他人工这一块，不可能做到这样一个成本控制或者它的整个全产业链的生态和技术。你如果美国它失去EU的话，它圣诞节也不要过了嘛，70%的圣诞数据在这里出的，那他肯定还是会去采购，只是他们自己的成本变相增加了。
So even if the tariffs return after the 90-day truce, chances are that products from here could still end up on US shelves for quite some time to come, albeit at higher prices. Tan Yu-guan, CNA, EU, China.
Well, Chinese banks are struggling to convince consumers to borrow, despite Beijing's offering easier access to credit. Consumer loans grew only 6.1%, that is in the first quarter of this year, reflecting a downtrend over the years. Now, the slow growth does not bode very well for official efforts to boost lending, which is seen as a faster alternative to raising and rising household incomes. Now, some banks marketed personal loans at record low interest rates below 3% before raising them back amid concerns over shrinking profit margins. Still, households are reluctant to borrow, with more than 60% now choosing to save instead. Now, recent wage cuts across the industry have dented their financial health. Higher U.S. tariffs also adding to worries over jobs and income stability. Banks say they're caught between hitting loan quotas and managing rising debt defaults, with some even prioritizing write-offs over fresh lending. Non-performing loans on personal lending have quickly piled up this year, especially at smaller banks. Economists warn that relying on debt to drive consumption will not be enough. They say without stronger income growth, China's recovery and regional trade momentum could remain shaky. Well, China and Japan finalizing plans to restart Japanese beef shipments to China after almost 24 years. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi and his Japanese counterpart Takeshi Iwaya discussed the quarantine accord to expedite the process during a meeting in Kuala Lumpur. The positive move reflects Beijing's desire to strengthen ties with Tokyo as rivalry with Washington intensifies. Beef shipments were halted in 2001 over Japan's outbreak of mad cow disease. The latest development follows China's lifting of a blanket ban on Japanese seafood imports introduced in 2023 over safety concerns related to the discharge of Fukushima wastewater. Now, despite signs of a surplus, the International Energy Agency warns the global oil market is tighter than it looks. The IEA has just raised its forecast for oil supply growth for this year to 2.1 million barrels per day, quite a bit more than last month's forecast. Meanwhile, demand is expected to rise by just 700,000 barrels per day. On paper, that's a surplus, but the IEA says physical market will remain tight as refineries ramp up processing to meet summer travel demand. And oil prices actions And they're reflecting those sentiments, both crude futures stabilizing after steep losses in the previous session. Brent is trading at $68.80, WTI $66 a barrel. Now looking ahead to 2026, the IEA expects to see another surplus in which production outpaced demand by about 600,000 barrels per day. But the market's still on the lookout for geopolitical risks. President Trump has hinted at new sanctions on Russia, and tariffs remain a concern. Both could further shake up global oil supply and demand. And that's all I have in business, Jill. Back to you.
That's it. And it's Friday.
Yeah,
Thanks so
happy
much,
Friday.
Liz, Liv, for that update there. Now, coming up on East Asia tonight, Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese is set for a China state visit with trade high on the agenda. But could regional security tensions get in the way? Well, we ask an expert after the break. This is East Asia Tonight, and here are the headlines we're following. America and China's top diplomats hold face-to-face talks for the first time since the return of President Donald Trump. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio calls the meeting very constructive, but said issues remain between the two superpowers. South Korea, Japan and the U.S. launch a joint air drill, flying a B-52 strategic bomber and fighter jets over international waters, while their defense chiefs hold a three-way meet in Seoul. And Tokyo and Beijing are taking steps towards resuming Japanese beef exports to China. Japan's Farm Ministry says an animal health agreement with China has come into force, paving the way to restart beef exports. Now, Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese heads to Shanghai tomorrow on a China mission with trade and security high on the agenda. Mr. Albanese is due to meet Chinese President Xi Jinping next week, and that's a meeting critics have lambasted because the Australian leader has not met U.S. President Donald Trump yet. And Mr. Albanese will travel with executives from mining giants Rio Tinto, BHP and Fortescue and hold events in 3 cities over 6 days. Now, he told reporters today that the relationship in China means jobs in Australia.
During the visit there, I will be taking a range of Australian businesses led by the Business Council of Australia, because 1 in 4 of Australian jobs depends upon our trade, and around about 25% of our exports go to one destination, China, bigger than the next 4 of our partners combined of Japan, South Korea, the United States and India. That tells us a lot about the significance which is there.
This is the Australian leader's second visit to China since taking office in 2022. The two countries have been steadily mending their ties after a diplomatic freeze and trade bans worth about $13 billion in 2020. Mr. Albanese helped reverse many of those restrictions, but has also stressed Australia's need to diversify and avoid over-reliance on a single market. Now, two-way trade hit about $205 billion last year. That is a quarter of all Australian trade. Security concerns also a sticking point. Mr. Albanese says direct engagement with Chinese leaders is vital, especially as tensions grow. Australian Foreign Minister Penny Wong, speaking in Malaysia this week, warned that China's military buildup was worrying and aimed at shifting the balance of power in the region. Well, let's stay and get more from Liu Min Ran. He is live from Brisbane and a lecturer at the School of Political Science and International Studies at the University of Queensland. Dr. Liu, nice to see you back again. I want to talk about the first question about who's visiting who first. Now, the state visit comes, as I've mentioned, Albanese is yet to visit the US. He's going to China first. What message does this send about Australia's alliance priorities and diplomatic optics in Washington?
So, well, I'd say it's less about Canberra's alliance priorities or how things look. It is, I think, more about unpredictability of Trump and his administration, to be honest. take the recent G7 meeting in Canberra, in Canada, as an example. Albanese was actually supposed to meet Trump there, but Trump left early. So, and also, Albanese isn't the first time an Australian Prime Minister has met with Chinese president before the US one. Back in 2013, Tony Abbott did the same thing. He met Xi actually before he got chance to sit down with Obama. I think it is mostly about the unpredictability of Trump.
Well, maybe in the larger scheme of things, it doesn't matter so much. But China's ambassador to Canberra has also warned Australia against, increasing defence spending and says, let's cooperate instead of confront. How is Australia managing the balancing act between Washington and Beijing? And what path forward do you think is likely to emerge?
I think certainly from Beijing's perspective, Beijing wants to make this as a request. Wants to push Canberra a little bit on this front. But I think from Australia, from Canberra's perspective, Canberra, since the Labor government took office, has been managing its critical relationships with both Beijing and Washington, I'd say relatively well. So on the one hand, the United States has been Australia's security guarantor and a great powerful friend ever since the first World War. And on the other hand, you have China. China is Australia's largest trading partner, but also these two economies are very complementary. So the only reason why Australia avoided a recession before COVID, the only developed country to do so in the past 30 years, was because of its ties with China. So these two relationships are very important. I think ever since Albanese government took office, they've been managing these two relations really well.
Okay, I understand. Now, Albanese, though, has he has publicly dismissed two very sensitive Chinese proposals ahead of his visit. One is to incorporate artificial intelligence into the free trade agreement, and another is to ease up on foreign investment restrictions. How significant are these rebuffs to China, and what do they signal about where Canberra's red lines stand?
I think this actually highlights the differing perspectives these two countries on these two issues. As Albanese said, his trip to China is about strengthening business, trade, tourism ties, emphasizing job creation, and also his top priority is to discuss these economic issues. And from Canberra's perspective, these two issues are actually security issues. This is very different from Beijing's perspective, because Beijing sees AI, sees foreign investment restrictions as more as economic issues. So I think it highlights different perspectives on these two important issues.
Yeah, interesting way of looking at it. But we have to touch on the topic of rare earths, too, because it can be seen also as a security issue. The future of that sensitive port of Darwin is also expected to be raised. And I'm wondering, it's a topic that has drawn sharp criticism from Beijing in the past. How might this unresolved issue influence the broader talks that are going to happen in China?
Yep. Certainly, one of the biggest things Albanese's played, apart from Euro topics like trade, is explaining Canberra's
Oh, well, that's a shame. We seem to have lost Dr. Liu there, but we did manage to get quite a few of those key points addressed. And, of course, let me remind you that Dr. Liu was speaking to us from Queensland. He is the lecturer at the School of Political Science and International Studies at the University of Queensland. Now, in other news, former South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol has failed to appear for a questioning session over his attempt to impose martial law, citing health reasons. Now, Yoon has also been held at the Seoul Detention Center since Thursday. He was supposed to undergo questioning by a special counsel this afternoon. The special counsel has asked for evidence showing the alleged health problems, as it warned that force will be used to escort the former leader if his absence cannot be explained. Separately, a special counsel team on Friday raided Yoon's home as part of an investigation into his alleged interference in a probe over the death of a Marine conscript. Now, Yoon allegedly took issue with the investigation's results and had instructed officials to cancel a media briefing while preventing the case from being transferred to the police. Former President Yoon's dramatic fall was triggered when he declared martial law in December last year. He became South Korea's first sitting president to be taken into custody when he was detained in a dawn raid in January. He was released from detention on procedural grounds in March. Now, in April, Yoon was formally removed from office after his impeachment was upheld by the country's constitutional court. He now faces multiple charges, including falsifying documents, abuse of power, and an obstruction of justice. Now, North Korea says a heatwave has hit multiple regions in the country and has issued a heatwave advisory until end of Friday. Footage shown by state broadcaster KRT shows residents using umbrellas for shelter and many cooling off at water fountains. Now, the capital, Pyongyang, and regions such as Pyeongsan and Wiwon saw temperatures reach up to 35 degrees Celsius as humidity levels went above 70%. Now, citizens have been advised to stay hydrated and limit their outdoor activities. But the United Nations data released today shows North Korea received more than $2 million in international aid so far this year, all of it from Switzerland. The UN's financial tracking service said Bern delivered $1.1 million to Pyongyang through the UN's Children's Fund and the remainder through a Swiss humanitarian fund. International aid to North Korea saw a sharp drop from nearly $42 million in 2020 to under $1.5 million in 2023. And that's because North Korea completely shut its borders and banned the entry of international aid staff during the COVID-19 pandemic. Coming up on East Asia tonight, a new battle is taking shape in Silicon Valley, one where big tech firms are vying to hire the top minds in artificial intelligence. And as the number of AI projects surge, so does energy use. Can nuclear energy help meet the world's growing demand for power? The global artificial intelligence race is heating up, with tech industry players going all out to hire specialists. Some companies are offering multi-million-dollar pay packages to the top minds in AI in a bid to hire them. Ira Spitzer has more on how this sprint for talent intertwines with geopolitics.
Meta has put the tech industry on notice. It's seeking to reshape an AI landscape where it's currently a step behind its rivals. In the past couple months, the Facebook and WhatsApp owner has dug into its very deep pockets to bring in more than a dozen big-name AI researchers and engineers, as New York University professor Robert Siemens explains.
It's astronomical sums that Meta is paying to collect this group of AI researchers. So these are folks that not only have a very specific AI skill set, but they also have managerial experience. And so as you can imagine, the sort of Venn diagram intersection of those two is really, really small.
OpenAI CEO Sam Altman recently said Meta was offering his employees $100 million pay packages to switch sides. And this week, Meta announced that it had hired Roming Peng, who led Apple's Foundation Models team. This follows Meta's hires of Scale AI's CEO Alexander Wang and ex-GitHub CEO Nat Friedman. In a place that's always looking for the next big thing, many here in Silicon Valley believe they've found it. Gene Munster, a partner at Deepwater Asset Management, says the recent advances in AI technology are likely just the beginning.
There are competent companies with vast resources that still believe we are early in AI, number one. And number two is that AI is going to be more transformational than what I think most people believe.
That's led to an all-out sprint for talent from tech's biggest firms. Meta's moves are part of what looks like an arms race, with companies like OpenAI, Microsoft, and Google all recruiting and spending heavily. But while the technology is impressive, monetizing it is still a work in progress.
You look at OpenAI, you look at Anthropic, they are not profitable companies. So it's not entirely clear how quickly Meta will be able to take this investment in these AI scientists and then be able to turn around and say, sort of point to additional profits.
However, many experts believe these eye-popping salaries and investments will ultimately pay off, and that AI will fundamentally reshape just about everything, creating the same sort of societal and economic impact of developments like electricity or the internet.
The vast majority of where the spending is going to come is from businesses and essentially countries, sovereign, in terms of using these models to power things much more aggressively.
Artificial intelligence is increasingly viewed as not only a competition between tech firms, but as a competition between countries, with the US and China in the lead. Many of Meta's recent high-profile hires are originally from China, people who came to the US for their graduate studies and stayed because of the career opportunities here. With the Chinese AI ecosystem also rapidly advancing and the success of companies like DeepSeek, China would like to see some of that top AI talent return there as well. Ira Spitzer, CNA, Menlo Park, California.
Now, as the planet heats up and energy demand surges, countries are revisiting one of the most debated power sources of the past, nuclear energy. On the two-parter CNA documentary, The Nuclear Option, producers filmed across 10 countries, visiting high-security nuclear energy facilities and meeting communities living near them. Take a look.
The world is still increasing in population, and the populations that are out there are becoming more energy intensive.
Nuclear power probably is one of the very few major sources of power which can really save mankind going forward.
A surge in global energy demand is prompting many countries to review the nuclear option. Currently, 440 reactors are in operation worldwide, with 70 more under construction.
China now has the largest amount of production of power. It's so much that it's doubling the size of the total power generation in the United States. China is building, as we speak, the largest amount of reactors compared with any other country. And also China has approved reactors to be built in the coming years and decades, more so than any other country in the world.
It was coal primarily that fueled Shandong's industries and homes. Until recently, Shandong's power grid now taps on nuclear energy. In 2023, Shandong built its first small modular nuclear reactor plant, the first of its kind commercially operating onshore. The plant produces 210 megawatts of electricity, enough to power over 300,000 households. Buried beneath the layers of the Finnish bedrock lies Onkalo, the site of what is to be the world's first permanent storage facility for spent nuclear fuel.
The spent nuclear fuel will be finally disposed underground in the depth of 435 meters.
Radioactive waste is certainly a downside of nuclear power. I do like to sort of put it into perspective and say, if you got all of your power, not just electricity, but heat and transportation for your entire life, you would be responsible for basically a soda can of nuclear waste.
For decades, the Kashiwazaki Kariwa nuclear power plant was the economic lifeblood for the community, providing jobs directly or indirectly to most families in the area.
Well, after the Fukushima disaster, all the nuclear power plants in Japan, including their largest ones, were shut down. And they will have to undergo a safety review to understand the plant's design, whether will there be adequate emergency backup systems to be available in the event of another earthquake or natural disasters.
Learning from Fukushima, new safety upgrades have been installed at the Kashiwazaki Kariwa nuclear power plant.
こちらは2万トンの淡水を蓄えている貯水池です。いざという時に原子炉とか使用済み燃料プールの方に淡水を供給するためのその水源を増強するために建設したものです。で、この訓練用の車両はですね、いざという時に原子炉に冷却水を供給したりだとか、7号機についてはいつでも技術的には原子炉を起動できる状況にはなっているんですけども、やはりこの先進めていくにあたっては地元の方々の理解がもっと進んでいく必要があるというふうに私ども認識してございます。いう認識のもと、今理解活動に非常に力を入れてやっているところでありまして。
今のところよほどのことがない限り、もう福島第一のような事故になるということはないと思いますけど。
Wow. Now, if you see something that you're interested in and like to find out a little bit more, well, the nuclear option premieres tomorrow at 9 p.m. on CNA. You can also stream both episodes via Me Watch, CNA Video on Demand, or CNA Insider YouTube channel. In Singapore, research efforts into nuclear safety have been given a boost through a $66 million grant. The funding is going to the newly established Singapore Nuclear Research and Safety Institute. This is in a bid to assess the potential to use nuclear energy here and the impact of regional nuclear developments. The institute was previously doing its research under an initiative. Its research scope will now expand. It will study areas like nuclear reaction and strengthening nuclear policy. This was announced at the launch of the institute's building today. And that takes us to the end of East Asia tonight. But don't forget, your headlines are available anytime at CNA.Asia. Also, check us out on Facebook and YouTube. Good night.